biggest film opening of all time was the last Harry Potter movie. If you remember, there was huge anticipation for it, and it made over $90 million in its first day. But did you know that a video game called Grand Theft Auto 5 recently made $800 million in its first day? Video games are probably bigger business than you realize. 2 billion people across the world play them, and 400 million of those people play for 50 or more hours a week. And we need to forget those stereotypes that they're just played by quirky adolescent boys. In the United States now, the average player is 34 years old. 40% of players are female, and 26% of players are over the age of 50. So even though they've only been around for about 40 years, video games have already become an extraordinary force in modern society. And they can deeply impact behavior, for good or for bad. Now, you've probably heard much more of the bad. For example, some research does show links between playing aggressive video games and actual real-life violence. In a high-profile illustration of this, a 17-year-old boy promptly shot both of his parents in the head when they tried to take away his copy of Halo 3, the video game that is pictured here. In another infamous example, the Columbine, Colorado shooters had customized a version of their favorite video game, Doom, to plan their 1999 massacre. Now, this does not mean that everyone who plays a violent video game in the morning is then going to blow someone away in real life in the afternoon. However, there is research supporting some of these links. Another emerging issue is that of video game addiction. You don't generally see news reports about somebody watching a movie over and over again until he dies. But this is exactly the kind of anecdotal report that we're getting more frequently with regard to video games, death after marathon sessions. In another example of addiction, it involved a couple who became infatuated with a particular online game where they raised a virtual child. They became so obsessed with this game and spent so many hours that they forgot that they had a real 3-month-old at home who promptly died from starvation and neglect. This does not sound like the behavior of people playing games. It sounds like the behavior of people on hard drugs. But of course, this tremendous power can also be leveraged for positive health outcomes. For example, so-called active video games can encourage exercise, which is of course associated with a number of positive health outcomes. Video games can also be used to educate and to help manage chronic diseases. For example, Bronchi the Bronchiosaurus is an adventure game which helps kids manage their asthma. Video games are also particularly good with rehabilitation, for example, from a fracture or a stroke, because they can take a therapy that could have been very monotonous and make it much more engaging. Finally, video games have had a lot of success with distraction from pain or anxiety. For example, this virtual reality game leads burn victims through a refreshing ice world while their bandages are being changed, which can be very painful. Now, these games are a good start, but I think we're just scratching the surface in terms of really harnessing the power of this medium to improve health. So I'm now going to outline 4 things that I don't think we have sufficiently stolen from the video game industry. The first deals with instant reward. In health and medicine, we are all about the long-term payoff. Mr. Smith, if you take your blood pressure medicine for the next 50 years without stopping, then you might have less disease. But no, you're not necessarily going to feel any different when you take it or when you don't. No wonder adherence rates for this type of therapy are at or below 50%. It is not this way with video games, which are riddled with positive reinforcement. This is Peggle, an example of a casual puzzle game from, for example, the Angry Birds genre. You can see here, at any given moment, a beaver is popping out saying, "Excellent." You just got to slide, and so you get 50,000 bonus points, not 5 or 10. And whenever you complete a level, which only takes a minute or two, a full orchestral version of Beethoven's Ode to Joy celebrates your victory. How can we emulate this with our blood pressure patient? Can I make fireworks appear above his head when he takes his medication? Or some hallelujah chorus begin? We do have the technology to, say, add 10 points to his online total every time the bottle opens. And sure, I could program it to play a little song, but is that going to be motivating or just irritating? Related to this, imagine this familiar scene. You are faced with that chocolate cake after dinner. You want to resist, but you are faced with the immediate lure of dopamine, the pleasure chemical rushing through your brain. That reward would be instant. But what is the reward of holding back? Some theoretical future benefit? This leads to the second thing I think we should steal from the video game industry. Truly leveraging a social network. Maybe I can't produce a spontaneous cheer at the moment you decide internally to forego the chocolate cake, but maybe you press a button reporting that success, and soon after, positive feedback from a network of others appears. And then some of that same dopamine washes over you. It may not be as intense or as immediate, but it is a start. Now, things like this do exist. When you go for a run, you can program an app on your phone to automatically transmit your stats to your friends. But I think there is room to move here. How can we make these things even more fun, even more engaging, and even more rewarding? Video game makers work wonders with social networks. This is World of Warcraft, what we call a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. It has 8 million subscribers. That is more subscribers than People Magazine and Sports Illustrated combined. Each of these characters you see here is being controlled by a real person from somewhere across the world, and you can interact with them all in this text area. The world becomes very, very real and very, very important to the people who play in it, and they play for hours. For example, this couple bonded so much through Minecraft, another online role-playing game, that they actually made it their wedding theme. I don't think that at this point we in health and medicine are sufficiently harnessing the power of social media. Third, we need to acknowledge that we need help. Talent counts. You don't just come up with Pac-Man or SimCity overnight. Great video games are a combination of a number of different things, such as graphics and motivation and psychology. So what we need to do is we need to find the game designers of the future, and we need to get them to apply the principles of game design to our biggest needs in public health. Now, in bringing up that issue of talent, I need to, of course, acknowledge that wrinkle of funding. Talented people cost a lot of money, and today's graphics also cost a lot of money. As you can see from this still from Grand Theft Auto, graphics has come a long way since Space Invaders. And so if we're going to do this right, we are going to need more resources. Fourth and finally, we need to learn from successful video games the importance of having achievable intermediate milestones. Every great video game is progressive. It's based on levels to conquer and tasks to achieve. You can feel good about each progressive step. Now, it's partially that progression that may have been responsible for some of the addictive properties. Those people who were playing 50 hours of video games in a row were not just doing the same thing over and over again. They were constantly progressing, constantly getting to the next level, and they were so compelled that they couldn't stop. In health and medicine, we're still structuring most of our feedback as pass-fail. Either you made your cholesterol goal or you didn't. Either your hemoglobin A1C is less than 7 or it's not. And you don't have a chance to write yourself, to prove yourself, until your visit a year from now. it is not this way with video games, which have well-structured and organic relationships between whatever the current challenge is and the overall picture. Now, of course, dealing with a real-life chronic disease is a much more complex matter compared with slaughtering some giant, enormous, imaginary monster. But in either case, we'll be more successful if we do it one step at a time. So stealing the smarts of video games is not going to be as simple as just gamifying. It would be nice to think that we could just take our current health-related treatments and add some game-like component, like points or graphics or incentives, but that's not going to be enough. Because what we've seen today is that certain video games are successful because of a synergistic combination of many different things. So there is huge potential here. However, in order to really realize that potential, we're going to need to carefully apply principles like the 4 that I've outlined today. In other words, we're going to need to get much more serious about games. Thank you.